The federal government has unveiled an $8 billion plan to rebuild Penn Station. But there's one problem. Before a single new entrance can open, before the platforms can expand, before any of those sleek renderings become reality, one man still has to agree. James Dolan. The billionaire owner of Madison Square Garden controls the very space this project depends on. And that means the biggest obstacle to fixing Penn Station may not be engineering. It may not even be money. It may be the man sitting directly above it. That matters because Penn Station is not just another transit project. It is one of the most important transportation hubs in America, and for decades it has been stuck under a building many New Yorkers believe should never have been there in the first place. The original Penn Station was torn down more than 60 years ago. What replaced it, Madison Square Garden, became the symbol of that loss. And now, the same building sits at the centre of the latest attempt to rebuild what was destroyed. Almost nobody covering this project seems to be emphasising the one fact that could decide whether it succeeds or fails. The renderings are beautiful, the promises are ambitious, but the entire plan still depends on a negotiation that has no guarantee of happening. I've spent the last several weeks going through the engineering documents, the political history, the procurement records, and the newly released designs. And what I found isn't just a story about a train station. It's a story about power, about who controls public infrastructure in America, and about what happens when one private landlord holds the key to a project the whole city depends on. To understand what Dolan inherited, and why its destruction matters so much, you have to go back to 1910. The original Pennsylvania station was a monument on the scale of ancient Rome. Designed by McKim, Mead and White, the most celebrated architecture firm in America at the time, it covered 2 full city blocks. Its main waiting room was modelled after the baths of Caracalla in Rome. 150-foot ceilings, 84 Doric columns, 9 acres of travertine and granite, natural light flooding down through iron and glass. The writer Thomas Wolfe called it a place where the voice of time remained aloof and unperturbed, a drowsy and eternal murmur below the immense and distant roof. It was by any measure a civic cathedral, a statement that America's cities deserved grandeur. At its peak it handled over 100 million passengers a year. Then in 1962 the Pennsylvania Railroad, cash-strapped after 2 decades of declining ridership, announced it was selling the air rights above the station. The original building would come down, a sports arena and office complex would go up. The station would be pushed underground. Demolition began October 28, 1963. The architectural outcry was immediate and enormous. Architects, preservationists, and ordinary New Yorkers protested outside. The New York Times published an editorial still quoted today: "Any city gets what it admires, will pay for, and ultimately deserves." Out of that demolition, directly because of it, the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission was created in 1965. Modern American historic preservation law exists because of what happened to Penn Station. What replaced it was instantly despised. The arena above it, Madison Square Garden, opened in 1968. James Dolan's family bought it in 1994. Here's a detail that might piss you off. Madison Square Garden has not paid a single dollar in New York City property taxes since 1982. Not 1 cent. For over 4 decades. The tax exemption was put in place by Mayor Ed Koch, who was worried about losing the Knicks and Rangers to New Jersey. It was intended to be a temporary 10-year incentive, but through political manoeuvring it has been renewed in perpetuity. It is currently worth around $43 million a year. Over the last 40 years, the city has effectively handed the Dolan family over $1 billion in waived taxes. Meanwhile, the station underneath has had its budget cut, its maintenance deferred, and its renovation plans delayed for that same period. And the arena's management hasn't been a passive landlord. When transit agencies have pushed for renovations that would require access to the site, they have pushed back, hard. When the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, or MTA, proposed using a decommissioned taxiway, a chunk of disused space between the arena and an adjacent skyscraper, to bring natural light into the station, MSG executives refused to negotiate. Their position, stated at a 2023 City Planning Commission hearing, was simply that the MTA's plan was too thin on details. In 2023, the arena's special operating permit, the legal authorization to run a venue on that site, came up for renewal. The MTA tried to use the permit renewal as leverage, hoping to force the owners to the table. The City Council issued a 5-year permit instead, short enough to signal frustration, but not short enough to actually force a deal. As former New Jersey Transit CEO Kevin Corbett later said, it was a risky strategy based on the history of previous administrations' efforts to force their hand. The keyword being previous. In April 2025, the Trump administration made a move that nobody in New York City politics entirely expected. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy announced that the federal government was taking control of Penn Station's redevelopment. The MTA, which had been nominally leading the effort for years and had spent $74 million in planning funds without breaking ground on anything, was out. Amtrak and the Federal Railroad Administration were in. Duffy's framing was blunt. The MTA was inefficient. The state-led process had stalled. This project would now move at the speed of Trump. New York Governor Kathy Hochul, who had her own $8 billion state-led plan, one that critically involved her biggest real estate donor, Vornado, building 10 new skyscrapers around Penn Station in exchange for funding the reconstruction, responded by announcing that the state would contribute no funding to the federally led project. The MTA declined to sign any collaboration agreement with Amtrak. So in the span of a few months, the project gained federal momentum and lost state money and the cooperation of the agencies that operate 2 of the 3 rail systems the station serves. By May 2026, Amtrak named its master developer, Penn Transformation Partners, a joint venture between construction firms Halmar and Skanska. Halmar is currently building the MTA's 2nd Avenue subway extension. Skanska built LaGuardia's Terminal B, widely praised as one of the more successful recent public-private infrastructure projects in the United States. And then something quietly extraordinary appeared in an SEC filing. Madison Square Garden Entertainment, James Dolan's company, had signed a memorandum of understanding with the project. Dolan wasn't on the outside anymore. He was, in some formal if still undefined capacity, part of Penn Transformation Partners. The man who spent 2 decades blocking Penn Station renovation had just joined the team rebuilding it. The question is whether that's a breakthrough, or whether it just means he's now in the room to protect his own interests from the inside. The design renderings released on June 8, 2026 are, I'll admit, genuinely striking. The plan, developed by Practice for Architecture and Urbanism, or PAU, keeps Madison Square Garden in place. No relocation, no demolition of the arena itself. Instead, it wraps a new structure around the block from 31st to 33rd Street between 8th Avenue and the existing taxiway. The centerpiece is a new grand entrance on 8th Avenue, with a limestone exterior, Art Deco-inspired sculptural details, and floor-to-ceiling glass that echoes the James A. Farley building across the street. Inside, the station would gain a single-level concourse of roughly 170,000 square feet, a 175% increase in pedestrian circulation space. Ceilings would rise 30 to 50 feet. Natural light would pour in through new openings along the taxiway. Dead ends would disappear. Even MSG's structural columns would be turned into interior features, clad in ribbed bronze. The design draws inspiration from the original McKim, Mead and White Station, not as a copy, but as a reminder of what Penn Station used to be, a place that felt monumental, public, and unmistakably civic. Architect Vishan Chakrabarti says the plan could remove up to 100 columns from the station interior, opening up the platform level for the first time in decades. It would also reopen the long-closed Gimbel's passageway, reconnecting Penn Station with Herald Square. These are real improvements. For the first time in generations, Penn Station could start to feel less like a basement and more like a front door. But all of that depends on one thing happening first. And that's where the story gets complicated. To build that grand new entrance, something first has to disappear. The Infosys Theatre, the 5,600-seat venue attached to the 8th Avenue side of Madison Square Garden, and that's where James Dolan returns to the story. Just 4 months before the project was announced, Madison Square Garden signed a new naming rights agreement with Indian technology company Infosys for a theatre that may ultimately have to be demolished. The price to acquire that space has never been publicly disclosed. Officials confirmed only that the Dolan family will receive compensation. Based on a 2023 proposal from Halmar, outside estimates have put the figure at around $500 million. For one theatre, just to clear the space for the front door. Whether the new naming deal represents leverage, routine business, or evidence that negotiations are progressing, nobody outside the room really knows. And the room is not open to the public. The uncertainty is reflected in Madison Square Garden's own SEC filing, which contains a remarkable sentence. There is no assurance that the redevelopment of Penn Station, or the transactions involving Madison Square Garden Entertainment and the master developer, including the transfer of the Infosys Theatre, will be completed on the terms described or at all. In other words, the single most important prerequisite for the new entrance is not guaranteed. And the implications run far deeper than a theatre. The structural columns supporting that venue extend down into the platform level itself. They consume valuable track space, they limit circulation, and they stand in the way of the wider platforms and operational improvements the project promises. Those columns belong to James Dolan. Until the theatre transfer is finalised, the station is physically trapped. The entrance can't open, the columns can't come out, the platforms can't expand, and the through-running revolution Andy Byford envisions cannot happen. One building, one negotiation, and no guarantees. Let me be clear about what we know and what we don't, because the coverage around this announcement has been heavy on renderings and light on the hard numbers. So here are the three real problems. Problem 1. The funding gap is enormous. The federal government has committed $243 million so far. The project is estimated at $8 billion. Secretary Duffy has said the administration intends to fund the full amount, but New York State has said it is contributing nothing, and the MTA has not signed on. The exact mix of federal grants, loans, private financing, and developer equity still has not been publicly detailed. A coalition of elected officials, including Congressman Gerald Nadler and Manhattan Borough President Brad Hoylman-Seigel, demanded answers outside Penn Station just this past week. They called the process a blatant attempt to steal money, land, and power, and said New Yorkers still don't know who is paying, how much, or what happens next. Problem 2. The operators are missing. The MTA runs the Long Island Railroad and the subway, two of the three systems that use Penn Station every day, but it has declined to join the project. That raises a basic question. How do you rebuild one of the busiest stations in America without the agencies that run most of the trains through it? Transit advocates have warned that New Yorkers should not end up with another expensive monument that risks service and drains local revenue. That's not a fringe concern, it's an operational one. Problem 3. The timeline. Secretary Duffy has said this will not be a 20 or 30-year project, but every major infrastructure job in New York has a way of stretching far beyond the original schedule. East Side access took 17 years and cost $11 billion, more than double its initial estimate. The Second Avenue subway has taken, depending on how you count it, about a century. And nothing can move forward until the Infosys Theatre deal is finalised, the environmental review is complete, and the MTA's objections are resolved or worked around. That is supposed to happen by the end of 2027. Penn Station is not just a New York problem. It's the pivot point of the Northeast Corridor, the rail spine connecting Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. Roughly 100 million passenger trips move through it every year. The Gateway Tunnel project, which will add 2 new rail tunnels under the Hudson River, is funded and moving forward. Those tunnels feed directly into Penn Station. If Penn Station doesn't have the capacity and the design to process those new trains efficiently, the Gateway Tunnels, which will cost tens of billions of dollars, solve only half the problem. The bottleneck just moves underground. The original station, when it opened in 1910, said something. It said the United States builds things that last and things that inspire. Its destruction in 1963 said something different. Real estate speculation beats civic ambition, and private profit beats public dignity. The question now, in 2026, is which tradition this $8 billion project belongs to. The designs are impressive. The team has genuine credibility. The federal political will is real, for now. but the entire project pivots on a $500 million negotiation with a man who has paid no property taxes for 40 years, who just signed a new naming rights deal for the building he's supposed to hand over, and whose SEC filing contains a legally required sentence saying the theatre transfer might not happen at all. James Dolan has been the unmovable object at the centre of this story for 2 decades. He's now technically inside the tent. Whether that means the tent has gotten bigger, or whether it just means he has a better view, is the only question that actually matters. I'll be watching.